could you do this to me?
It didn't mean anything, I swear.
Caius.
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 A faint vibration bleeds into the silence. Not sound exactly, more like pressure, as if the darkness itself is aware you're listening. Some names are not forgotten. They are suppressed, cut from records, burned from libraries, stricken from prayers. Yet suppression does not erase. It only delays. And when those names resurface, they do not arrive alone. Assodius, not a bedtime horror, not a folkloric exaggeration, but a recurring intelligence, one that adapts to faith the way a virus adapts to its host. He has worn many titles, spoken through many tongues, but his influence remains unmistakable. In the oldest Persian cosmologies, he appears as a malignant force tied to chaos and rage. In rabbinical tradition, he becomes a cunning corrupter, clever, articulate, humiliating the faithful through temptation. And within Christian demonological hierarchy, he emerges fully crowned, a sovereign of desire, a manipulator of longing, a presence that enters not through violence, but invitation. With time, his legend did not weaken. It condensed. Stories gave way to warnings. Warnings turned into procedures. Procedures became case studies. Exorcists recorded encounters they could not explain. Scribes avoided writing his name in full. Entire sections of grimoires were blacked out, not to protect the reader, but to protect reality itself. Because to study certain entities too closely is to announce your attention. And some things respond to attention. This investigation follows Assodius through fractured scriptures, outlawed manuscripts, demonological field notes, and possession reports that end mid-sentence. So if you're watching this late at night, alone, understand this. Curiosity is not neutral. Tonight, the archives are unsealed, and some doors, once opened, remember who unlocked them. They did not fall with thunder. They arrived quietly, before humanity raised monuments, before gods were given faces, before morality had structure. They watched. Ancient texts described them as sentinels, being stationed at the margins of creation. Observers. According to the Book of Enoch, they were known as the Watchers. The Gregory. Their purpose was restraint. Their virtue was distance. They were never meant to participate, but eternity erodes discipline, and observation breeds envy. 200 of them turned their gaze downward and lingered too long. Led by Samaiza, they abandoned their stations and descended upon Mount Hermon, not in open rebellion, but in secrecy. Before crossing the boundary, they bound themselves with a vow, not sworn upward, but sideways, a mutual promise, because none wished to bear the consequences alone. They chose human women. They crossed essence with flesh. They violated a separation older than creation, and the result was catastrophic. Their offspring were colossal, unnatural in form and appetite. History remembers them as heroes, but the earth remembers them as disasters. They consumed without limit. They ruled without mercy. They bent worship into terror. Creation itself recoiled. Yet beneath even these accounts, beneath the giants and their destruction, another presence lingers, not recorded directly, not named clearly, a distortion in the lineage, a shadow between sentences. Assodius, absent from the Watcher's role for a reason. Later scholars began to suspect something worse than a fallen angel. They proposed that Assodius was never cast down. He was conceived, the product of a renegade watcher and an undying woman, possibly Naima, whose allure was said to unmake the disciplined and unravel the divine. If true, Assodius was unprecedented, neither celestial nor mortal, a synthesis of defiance and craving, a being formed not by judgment, but by desire. Others lost grace. Assodius was never offered it. He matured instead, feeding on fixation, unfulfilled yearning, and obsession left to rot. He did not conquer with armies. He dismantled bloodlines. He did not burn cities with flame. He hollowed them out with indulgence. His earliest traces appear not in sanctuaries, but in collapsed civilizations, in places where ritual dissolved into excess, where smoke-filled chambers echoed with voices no priest could identify, where devotion curdled into frenzy. Mesopotamian records speak of a sag, a malignant force spreading illness and madness through forbidden unions, a destroyer not of bodies, but of restraint, because Assodius does not force entry. He persuades, he waits, and when the wolf finally breaks, he lets the victim open the door themselves. And this was only the first movement. A dull, scratching sound rises like fingernails against stone. Slowly, then silence. Some demons are born in a moment. Others are assembled, piece by piece, fear by fear, century by century. Long after the ruins of the earliest cities sank into sand, later scholars began drawing uneasy connections, linking Assodius to older malignant figures whose names have been deliberately blurred by time. These were not coincidences. They were breadcrumbs. But it was not until catastrophe reshaped an entire people that his name finally stabilized. When the Hebrews were driven into exile, when identity, land, and divine protection seemed to fracture, something else took form. In Babylon, fear was not abstract. It lived in childbirth, in infertility, in forbidden longing, in the quiet dread of losing God's favor. And it was here, in this pressure cooker of despair and devotion, that Assodius was finally written down, etched into parchment, woven into folklore, sealed behind ritual warnings and divine terror. By the era of captivity, Jewish mystics and scribes no longer whispered his earlier titles. They called him Ashmedai, the spirit of lust, the architect of ruin, the embodiment of vengeance disguised as desire. Unlike lesser spirits, those exiled to obscurity or erased by changing belief, Ashmedai endured. Because he was not simple. He was not reckless. He was ancient enough to remember heaven, and clever enough to manipulate earth. He spoke the language of angels. He mastered the dialects of men, and he enjoyed turning them against one another. The Talmud would later describe him not as a wandering spirit, but as a ruler, a king over the Shadim, beings who existed in the thin spaces between realms. Not damned, not redeemed, something unresolved. Ashmedai was not forged in a single act of rebellion. He was constructed across generations, in the terror surrounding childbirth, in shame surrounding desire, in the slow realization that temptation could kill without ever drawing blood. He was not shaped in an underworld. He was shaped in reflection, a demon born not from what humanity feared, but from what humanity wanted and could never safely touch. And that hunger made him relentless. The first time Scripture names him outright, the story is deceptively simple, almost domestic. In the book of Tobit, we meet a woman named Sarah. She has been married 7 times, and 7 times Her husbands died, not in war, not by illness, not by accident, but in the privacy of the bridal chamber, before consummation, before union, before love could become covenant. The text records it almost clinically. The wicked demon Ashmedai had slain them, but the implication is anything but restrained. Ashmedai was not merely destroying men. He was claiming her. He did not kill Sarah. He occupied her life, not through convulsions or grotesque spectacle, but through something far more invasive. Her soul existed under his shadow. The demon of desire did not rage blindly. He waited, and when a man approached her with longing, when intimacy threatened to become sacred, Ashmedai intervened. Every time, 7 deaths, 7 violations of what should have been holy. 7 is not a random number. In Scripture, it signifies completion, covenant, divine judgment. Ashmedai struck with precision, as if mocking heaven's own symbolism. What was meant to bind 2 souls became a ritual of slaughter, and each death reinforced his dominion. Then enters Tobias, a young man on a journey that seems ordinary. Retrieve a family debt, restore honor, secure marriage. But nothing about this path is accidental. Unseen, another presence joins him. The archangel Raphael, masked as a traveler, sent not to comfort, but to intervene. Raphael does not preach. He instructs. He gives Tobias something rare in ancient texts, a method, a procedure, a countermeasure. He commands Tobias to take the heart and liver of a fish and burn them, creating smoke potent enough to drive out a possessing spirit. This is not metaphor. This is instruction. One of the earliest recorded exorcism rites. Precise, physical, dangerous. On the night of the wedding, Tobias enters Sarah's chamber. No music, no celebration, only tension thick enough to suffocate. He lights the fire. The organs burn. Smoke fills the room. And somewhere beyond the veil of perception, something reacts. Because Ashmedai does not flee easily. And when he is forced to retreat, he remembers. What happens next changes everything. Send the next part when you're ready. Smoke rolls upward again, but this time slower, heavier, as if gravity itself is uncertain. It does not disperse. It lingers. Some spirits recoil from holy words, others from sacred symbols. But this one fled from scent, from a smell so hostile to its nature that it shattered its hold on the mortal world. The burning organs release a vapor thick with ritual intent. According to the ancient account, the demon sensed it immediately. There is no dramatic confrontation, no battle cries, only instinct. Assodius withdraws, not in defeat, but in preservation. He escapes beyond borders, beyond jurisdiction, to the furthest reaches of Egypt, a land already heavy with magic, death, and divine conflict, a place where gods once battled openly, and where exile itself carried spiritual weight. There, at the threshold of the known world, he is confronted, not by man, but by Raphael. The archangel does not negotiate. He binds the demon, not with fire, not with pain, but with authority. And yet, the text is careful. Assodius is restrained, contained, never erased, never destroyed, never unmade. And that distinction changes everything. The Book of Tobit is rarely framed as terror literature. But remove the reverence, and what remains is harrowing. A predator that kills exclusively in moments of intimacy. A woman ostracized, whispered about, blamed for death she did not cause. A marriage chamber transformed into a recurring crime scene. And hovering over it all, a divine agent force to intervene not in a battlefield, but in a bedroom. This is not spectacle. It is violation. And perhaps the most disturbing implication is this. The threat is only postponed. Assodius is not gone. He is waiting, bound beyond sight, beyond prayer, beyond immediate reach, but still aware, still conscious, still patient. The veil remains thin. Rabbinical tradition does not soften this image. It sharpens it. Later teachings portray Assodius, now firmly known as Ashmedai, not as a rogue spirit, but as a cosmic inevitability, a force woven into human experience. It is said that no king escapes him, that every ruler, no matter how righteous, must bow at least once, not in worship, but in recognition, because power does not grant immunity, and wisdom does not prevent desire. Ashmedai is not shaped from earth. He is not crowned through conquest. His authority is intangible. His throne is built from smoke, always present, never solid. His crown is alive. Serpents twisting, whispering, feeding. He governs no territory, only weakness. And once, just once, he ruled openly. In Jewish folklore, Ashmedai evolves beyond a symbol of lust. He becomes a mind, calculating, proud, terrifyingly articulate. He does not roar like beasts of pagan nightmare. He reasons. He bargains. He anticipates. This is what makes him dangerous. He does not merely tempt. He administers. His most infamous appearance unfolds in the Babylonian tradition surrounding King Solomon, a ruler granted divine wisdom, judgment so sharp it bordered on prophetic. And yet, even Solomon required something forbidden to complete the temple, to shape sacred stone without iron, to avoid contamination by bloodshed. He needed the shamir, a thing that should not exist, a force that breaks matter without violence. And only one being knew where it was hidden. Ashmedai. Solomon's plan was not brute force. It was strategy, chains bearing a divine name, symbols that burn even demons to touch, a vessel of intoxicating drink, because even ancient spirits have vices. Ashmedai was captured, bound, presented before the king. But captivity did not silence him. For years, Ashmedai remained at Solomon's court, not screaming, not raging, but teaching. He spoke in riddles layered with truth, answered questions no scholar could resolve, shared insights that built empires and corrupted them simultaneously. And all the while, he waited. Demons are patient. They do not rush vengeance. They calculate it. Then came the fatal misjudgment, whether from pride or misplaced faith. Solomon ordered the restraints removed, a moment meant to demonstrate dominance. Instead, it revealed vulnerability. Because the instant Ashmedai was free, he did not hesitate. He did not warn. He did not bargain. He struck. What followed would echo through centuries as a lesson carved into legend. Knowledge does not equal control. Wisdom does not guarantee safety. And some forces can only be restrained, never trusted. A violent distortion ripples through the air, like reality tearing apart. Then impact. Power does not always fade. Sometimes it is ripped away. Rabbinical legend tells us that Ashmedai did not argue with Solomon. He did not challenge him in debate. He did not test him with riddles. He removed him. With a force that defied nature, the demon hurled Solomon, God's chosen king, hundreds of miles from Jerusalem. One moment crowned in glory, the next reduced to dust and distance. And in the same breath, Ashmedai took the ring engraved with the ineffable name, the seal that commanded spirits. the anchor of Solomon's authority over the unseen. This was not theft. It was usurpation. With the ring, Ashmedai took more than power. He took Solomon's shape, his voice, his presence, his legitimacy. For 40 days, some traditions murmur far longer, the demon sat upon the throne of Israel wearing the face of divine wisdom. He issued judgments that sounded righteous, but twisted law at its roots. He indulged appetite while cloaked in holiness. He let corruption wear the mask of God's chosen ruler, and the people never noticed, because evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it rules politely. The true Solomon wandered the world like a ghost, barefoot, unwashed, unrecognized. He begged for food, warned strangers, screamed the truth into indifferent air. A demon had stolen his life. A demon sat on his throne, and to most who heard him, he sounded insane. What horror is greater than knowing the truth and watching it be dismissed as madness? Only after prolonged suffering, after hunger stripped him of pride, and isolation stripped him of certainty, did Solomon recover the ring. Only then was Ashmedai exposed, cast down, driven away. But the legends are careful with their wording. Ashmedai was expelled, not erased. This story survives not in canonical scripture, but in oral rabbinical memory. And that matters, because oral tradition preserves what is too unsettling to sanctify. This is not allegory. This is warning. The overthrow of wisdom by arrogance. Even at the height of divine wisdom, something darker was active. Teaching, corrupting, waiting, across religions, across centuries. The pattern never changes. He is expelled but not ended, chained but not silenced, defeated but never gone. Names shift, masks change, the presence remains. A low chant rises beneath the silence, fragmented, reversed, almost human. It never resolves. When forbidden knowledge spreads, it rarely announces its source. It arrives disguised as instruction, as revelation, as help, and by the time its consequences are visible, it is already too late. The verse does not end with Solomon. It widens. The text turns toward Babylon, the city that symbolized humanity's hunger to reach beyond its limits. A place where language fractured, where pride collapsed into confusion. And there, two figures emerge from the smoke of legend. Herod and Merot, angels or watchers, depending on the tradition. Beings who taught humanity how to touch the unseen, how to summon spirits, how to bend hidden forces. This was not sacred wisdom. It was restricted, knowledge meant to test, not empower. And the warning was explicit. What they taught would destroy families. It would fracture trust. It would sever husband from wife. The text makes no attempt to soften the outcome. This knowledge spread anyway, because something else carried it forward. A whispering presence, a corrupting influence. The devil taught it among men, not openly, but patiently. For those raised in Christian tradition, this should sound disturbingly familiar. A force that targets marriage, a presence that intervenes in intimacy, a being that weaponizes desire to tear apart sacred union. It mirrors almost exactly the pattern seen earlier in the book of Tobit. Different scripture, same signature. Though the Quran never names Assodius directly, the behavioral profile aligns with chilling precision. In Islamic folklore, jinn are not simplistic monsters. They are complex. They live. They form families. They feel love, jealousy, resentment. And they die. But they also deceive. They possess. They intrude. Some protect. Others corrupt. Among them are classes of spirits specifically associated with sexual violation and psychological collapse. In North African and Middle Eastern traditions, there is the Visar, entities believed to afflict women through nocturnal visitations, invasive dreams, infertility, and sudden illness. Their presence is intimate, humiliating, deeply destructive. They do not attack villages. They invade bodies. Then they're the Ifrit, powerful, violent, born of fire and fury. The Ifrit is among the most feared classes of jinn, associated with devastation, rage, and unrestrained cruelty. Whether the Sar corrupts quietly, the Ifrit annihilates. Different methods, same appetite. In obscure Persian and apocryphal writings, another name surfaces, Ashadai, sometimes rendered Eshem. These texts describe a being of wrath, one who strikes lovers, poisons households, dismantles families from within. He is not random. His violence is targeted. And opposing him stands Sarasha, the angel of obedience, a direct parallel. An echo of Raphael opposing Assodius in Tobit. Different language, different culture, same confrontation. The pattern is impossible to ignore. By the time Europe staggered out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, Assodius had completed another transformation. He stepped out of scripture, out of folklore, and into ritual. Western ceremonial magic no longer treated him as a vague threat or symbolic warning. He became cataloged, ranked, summonable, no longer just feared, but available. This shift marked something catastrophic. Fear turned into curiosity, curiosity into control, and control into commerce. A god, for sale. Written between the 17th and early 18th centuries, the Lesser Key of Solomon is not devotional text. It is a manual, a cold, procedural compilation of invocations, sigils, bindings, and protections. It catalogs 72 demons, all said to have been restrained by Solomon himself. And among them, Assodius appears, not vaguely, not metaphorically, but precisely. He is listed as the 32nd spirit, a king of considerable authority, serving under Mammon, ruler of material excess and corruption of the East. His description is grotesque and deliberate. 3 faces, 1 bovine, 1 human, 1 ram-like, a serpent's tail, flames issuing from his mouth. He rides an infernal dragon. He carries a lance and a banner, symbols not of chaos, but command. This is not a mindless beast. This is a general. His domains are explicit: lust, luxury, indulgence, but also arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, craftsmanship, knowledge, the same disciplines attributed to him in earlier Jewish tradition, the same skills whispered about during the construction of the temple. The implication is horrifying. This being does not merely destroy. He builds, and in doing so, embeds himself into human progress, across millennia, across civilizations, across faiths. The figure remains consistent. He corrupts intimacy. He weaponizes knowledge. He thrives where desire meets pride. Different names, different texts, same intelligence, same hunger. A low, broken murmur crawls beneath the silence. Voices layered over one another, speaking instructions that do not belong together. They stop abruptly. Forbidden knowledge never disappears. It mutates. It relocates. It learns how to survive. And when it returns, it wears the language of truth. The verse does not rest with Solomon's disgrace. It spreads outward toward Babylon, a city remembered not only for empire, but for spiritual catastrophe, a place where human ambition scraped the sky, and reality itself fractured in response. From this landscape emerged two names wrapped in dread and contradiction: Herod and Marot, beings sent not to enlighten humanity, but to expose it. They revealed methods to contact unseen forces, techniques to manipulate the hidden architecture of the world. But this was never meant to elevate mankind. It was bait, a trial disguised as revelation, and humanity reached for it. The knowledge spread quickly, whispered in alleys, taught in secret chambers, passed like a contagion. Its effects were immediate and devastating. Homes collapsed from within. Trust eroded. Marriages dissolved under invisible pressure. The text is mercilessly clear. This power was used to tear apart husband and wife, to weaponize desire, to turn intimacy into vulnerability. To anyone steeped in Christian lore, the pattern feels disturbingly familiar. A presence that targets unions, a force that inserts itself into love, a corruption that does not strike openly, but seeps inward. It echoes precisely the earlier accounts in Tobit, where the bedroom becomes the site of repeated slaughter. Different scripture, identical method. The Quran never names the entity. It does not need to. The behavior alone is unmistakable. In Islamic cosmology, jinn are not simple monsters lurking in shadows. They are beings with agency. They form relationships. They experience longing and resentment. They build lives parallel to humanity's. And yet, they intrude. They deceive. They attach themselves to the vulnerable. Some protect. Others devastate. Certain classifications of jinn are feared not for brute violence, but for invasion. Entities believed to afflict women through intrusive dreams, sudden sickness, infertility, and psychological collapse. These spirits do not announce themselves. They linger. They burrow. They leave behind fractured identities, an unanswered shame. Then they're the Ifrit, towering, feral, forged from flame and fury. Among the most feared beings in Islamic lore, embodiments of rage, destruction, and merciless cruelty, where subtle entities dismantle slowly. The Ifrit obliterates. Different tools, same appetite. In obscure Persian and esoteric writings, another name surfaces. Never stable, always shifting. Ashadai, sometimes Eshem. Descriptions vary, but the essence does not. A spirit of wrath, a breaker of bonds, a predator of intimacy. He strikes lovers, ruins households, leaves families hollowed out, blaming one another. Opposing him stands Sarasha, the embodiment of obedience and restraint. Once again, the pattern repeats. A celestial force of order, confronting a being that feeds on desire. Different cultures, same conflict. As Europe staggered from medieval fear into Renaissance ambition, something irreversible occurred. The demon was no longer merely feared. He was systematized. Scripture gave way to diagrams. Prayer gave way to procedure. Assodius crossed a final threshold. He entered ceremonial magic, now labeled, now ranked, now callable. This was the moment terror transformed into transaction, when humanity stopped running and started negotiating. A force once blamed for societal collapse became something far more dangerous. A resource, a god, priced and packaged. The Lesser Key of Solomon reads less like mythology and more like technical documentation. Seals, symbols, instructions precise enough to kill. It catalogs 72 infernal intelligences, each allegedly constrained by Solomon's authority. Assodius is not obscure among them. He is identified clearly. The 32nd entity, a sovereign power within the hierarchy, subordinate to Mammon, the embodiment of excess, indulgence, and moral erosion. His form is deliberately grotesque. 3 faces fused into one existence. Dominion, intellect, sacrifice, a tail like a living serpent, endless appetite, fire pouring from his mouth, not to destroy, but to declare. He rides a dragon. He bears a weapon. These are not symbols of chaos. They are symbols of command. His influence remains chillingly consistent. Sensual excess, opulence, moraldica, but also mathematics, astronomy, architecture, craft, the sciences, the same proficiencies attributed to him in earlier traditions, the same knowledge whispered around sacred construction, which leads to a conclusion that is difficult to escape. This entity does not merely oppose holiness. He integrates into it. He embeds himself within progress, within innovation, within achievement, across centuries, across civilizations, across belief systems. The shape does not change. He fractures relationships. He corrupts knowledge. He flourishes where longing eclipses restraint. Names evolve, masks rotate, but the presence behind them endures. A breath is heard. Too close, too intimate, as if something unseen is standing just behind the listener. Then a woman whispers a name, not clearly, not confidently. The syllables tremble. Some demons announce themselves in Scripture. Others are named only by the condemned. And sometimes, the only record of their existence is carved into a confession made moments before death. She called him Asthma. That is how the court clerk wrote it down. Ink blotched, letters uneven, as if the word itself resisted being fixed to the page. A mispronunciation, perhaps, or the final distortion of a name already warped by centuries of fear. In 1611, in the city of Bamberg, Germany, a monk known as Brother Klaus was dragged before an ecclesiastical court. He stood accused of violating his vows of chastity, a crime that, in that era, already carried the weight of damnation. But Klaus did not confess as expected. He did not beg forgiveness. He warned them. Klaus testified that a woman came to him in the night. Not a stranger, not a monster. She appeared familiar, comforting, beautiful, persuasive. She spoke softly. She touched him gently. She entered his dreams before crossing into his waking life. But then, the room would change. The air would thicken. The light would dim. From the corners of the chamber, Klaus said, something else would emerge. A towering presence. Crowned, inhuman. A beast with the lower body of a serpent and eyes that did not blink. Sometimes it stood behind the woman. Sometimes it became her. This presence did not seduce. It oversaw, and when it spoke, Klaus said it did so with authority. As if testing him, judging him, it gave its name, Assodius. According to Klaus, this was no random sin. It was an examination. A trial reserved for the devout. The court did not hesitate. Klaus was declared corrupted beyond redemption. He was burned alive. The woman accused alongside him followed soon after. Their screams were drowned beneath sacred hymns, sung loudly enough to disguise terror as righteousness. The flames consumed flesh, but the testimony survived. This was not an isolated incident. Decades earlier, a single book had already prepared Europe to interpret such confessions as proof of guilt rather than warning. The Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches. It was not merely a text. It was a weapon. Compiled in 1487, it redefined evil as something intimate, sexual, and hereditary. It instructed inquisitors to view desire itself as evidence of demonic contamination. Later commentaries expanded this logic. They began to identify a specific architect behind sexual corruption, especially in cases involving priests, barren women, miscarriages, children born malformed. That architect was Assodius. Some inquisitors went further, far further. They claimed he could infiltrate a man's seed. That corruption could begin before birth. That bloodlines themselves could be poisoned from conception. The horror of this idea cannot be overstated. It meant evil did not need to possess the living. It could grow inside them. A demon could inhabit a generation, long before it took its first breath. This belief justified extermination. Because how do you spare? Was already claimed. By the 17th century, demonology attempted to impose order on terror. Sexual entities were categorized. Succubi, female spirits that drained men through seduction. Incubi, male entities that assaulted women in their sleep. But Assodius was never confined to one form. He was said to command both. He did not need to appear physically. His presence was administrative, where repression fermented, where shame met longing. There he ruled. Victims across Europe described nearly identical encounters. A presence entering the bedroom uninvited. A crushing weight pinning the body to the mattress. The inability to scream or move. Dreams that felt more real than waking life. Eyes watching from the dark. Animal traits recurring with grotesque consistency. Horns pressing into flesh. Hooves scraping the floor. Scales brushing against skin. Accounts describe burning heat. Paralysis. A violation so profound it fused terror with involuntary response. No wounds. No evidence. Only devastation. Then something changed. By the late 19th century, Europe grew weary of confessionals and pulpits. Faith in institutions eroded. But disbelief did not replace belief. Obsession did. This era became known as the Occult Revival. Intellectuals, aristocrats, mystics, many disillusioned with organized religion turned deliberately toward forbidden systems. Ancient gods, forgotten rites, demonologies once condemned. They did not deny the supernatural. They invited it indoors. Secret societies flourished. Orders resurrected medieval grimoires under the banner of higher knowledge. Texts once written as warnings became manuals, and within many of them, one name remained highlighted, circled, annotated, emphasized: Assodius. In these circles, he was no longer depicted as a horned tyrant. He was sanitized, abstracted, reimagined as a psychological force. Desire as enlightenment, lust as hidden wisdom, wrath refined into will. His monstrous form was reduced to lines and symbols, archetypes, correspondences, clean, intellectual, deceptively safe. But the rituals never lost their appetite. They still demanded the body. Nudity, sexual rites, bloodletting, periods of deprivation followed by indulgence. The flesh remained the conduit. The price remained the same. Only the language had changed. Across centuries, one truth refuses to fade. Assodius adapts. When hunted, he retreats. When denied, he waits. When invited, he enters. Not with fire, not with claws, but through the softest, weakest threshold humanity possesses. desire. A low crackle seeps into the silence, like fire breathing through stone. Something ancient is being awakened. For some, demons are metaphors, symbols of appetite, masks for psychology. For others, they're guests. There are few figures in modern occult history who stepped as close to the edge and leaned willingly into it as Aleister Crowley, poet, mystic, magician, self-proclaimed Great Beast 666. Crowley did not hide his intentions. He sought not redemption, but transformation. And while he rarely spoke the name Assodius openly in his published works, his private writings tell a far more troubling story. In his personal journals, particularly the magical record of the beast, scholars have identified veiled references to a king of lust, a presiding intelligence tied to ritualized pleasure, domination, and transgression. One such reference appears in connection to Liber 49, a sex-working rite designed not to honor divinity, but to force revelation through ecstasy. Crowley's system treated sex as sacrament, not intimacy, but instrument, ritual orgasm, same-sex workings, tantric inversions, the deliberate interruption of sacred union. Pleasure was not the goal. Power was. Knowledge was extracted through taboo, echoing ancient myths where desire becomes the gateway to forbidden sight. The body was not holy. It was a key, and Crowley believed Assodius, hidden beneath layers of coded language, was the intelligence waiting on the other side of that door. He did not fear this presence. He revered what it represented. Within the inner circles of the Ordo Templi Orientis, it is widely believed that initiates were instructed in rites, where Assodius was invoked directly, though never plainly. His name was masked beneath Hebrew divine formulae, hidden within Latin invocations, bullied in Germanic var rites. These ceremonies were not symbolic. They involved nakedness, open flame, sexual exhaustion, invocations aligned with Mars, the planetary force of aggression, heat, and blood. Crowley himself wrote, without irony, that the pleasures of his Asmodeus were the keys to unlocking the inner temple of man. He did not see corruption. He saw ascension. Soon, the shadow spread beyond Crowley. Whispers began circulating, quiet at first, linking Assodius to Freemasonry, particularly within French and Scottish esoteric branches. Not official doctrine, but undercurrents. And nowhere did these rumors crystallize more violently than at a single infamous location in southern France, Rennes-le-Château, a village steeped in secrecy, entangled with legends of the Knights Templar, hidden treasure, and heresy buried beneath stone. In the 1890s, a Catholic priest stationed there, Berenger Saunier, suddenly acquired immense wealth. No inheritance, no explanation. What he did leave behind was more disturbing. At the entrance of his renovated church, Saunier installed a statue, not of a saint, but of Assodius, grotesque, hunched, supporting a holy water font, a demon guarding the threshold of a consecrated space. The image detonated a century of speculation. Did Saunier uncover forbidden Templar knowledge? Was the statue a warning, or a confession? Or had the priest entered into a pact, trading devotion for riches? A child whispers. Some infestations announce themselves loudly. Others settle in. They learn the layout of a home. They memorize routines. They wait until fear becomes normal. Another case, one I have examined in detail before, has long been whispered about in connection with Assodius though never officially named. It unfolded in West Pittston, a quiet town, a modest duplex, a family that never sought attention, until something followed them home. For more than 15 years, Jack and Janet Smurl and their children claimed they were terrorized by an unseen presence that refused to leave. Not footsteps in the attic, not cold drafts. What they described was intimate, invasive, cruel. The activity escalated slowly, almost methodically. Foul odors flooded the home without warning. The stench of rotting flesh seeped through rooms with no source. Deep, animalistic growls echoed through hallways. Shadows detached themselves from walls and moved with intent. And then came the assaults. Both Jack and Janet reported violent sexual attacks. Unseen hands, crushing weight, violations that occurred in full consciousness. Not dreams, not hallucinations. They described a black mass. Thick, alive, aware, forming briefly, then dissolving, as if obeying its own command. The terror did not discriminate. Adults, children, every room, every night became a negotiation with sleep. The case drew national attention, eventually reaching Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren, two of the most recognized demonologists of the 20th century. After their investigation, Lorraine Warren made a chilling distinction. This was not a ghost. It was not a residual haunting. It was an infestation, something intelligent, something predatory, something inhuman. The Warrens deliberately avoided naming the entity publicly. But silence does not prevent speculation. In later books, private correspondence, and occult forums, one name surfaced again and again. Assodius, not because of spectacle, but because of pattern. The assaults targeted both genders. Marital intimacy was shattered. The home, once a place of refuge, became hostile ground. And Jack Smurl was a devout Catholic. That detail matters, because historically, Assodius is drawn not to chaos, but to faith, to discipline, to vows. Eventually, the church sanctioned an exorcism. Details remained deliberately vague. No triumphant conclusion was ever announced. But when the family relocated, the phenomena stopped, as if whatever had claimed the house chose not to follow. Or perhaps it was finished. In modern Catholic exorcism manuals, Assodius is no longer treated as folklore. He is categorized, defined, filed, listed among spirits of impurity, entities whose primary method of attack is the destruction of intimacy and identity. Priests are instructed to watch for specific indicators during possession or infestation cases. Sudden obscene speech during prayer. Sexualized blasphemy during rites. Recurring nightmares involving hybrid or animalistic beings. Abrupt marital collapse. Divorce. Infidelity. Domestic abuse. Fixations on mirrors. Nudity. Self-image. These signs are not random. They form a diagnostic constellation. In the private field journals of Father Antonio Forti, one entry stands apart. He describes a case involving a Spanish woman, her identity withheld, who during possession spoke fluent ancient Hebrew, a language she had never studied. She referred to herself as the consort of kings, as the one who breaks their beds, as the one who names them. She spoke of a burning throne. She demanded blood and wine. Forti never publicly identified the entity, but in a private footnote, never intended for publication, he marked a reference. Compare Asmodeus. Book of Tobit, a quiet acknowledgement, a careful warning, not because of spectacle, but because of pattern. The assaults targeted both genders. Marital intimacy was shattered. The home, once a place of refuge, became hostile ground, and Jack Smurl was a devout Catholic. That detail matters, because historically, Assodius is drawn not to chaos, but to faith, to discipline, to vows. Eventually, the church sanctioned an exorcism. Details remained deliberately vague. No triumphant conclusion was ever announced. But when the family relocated, the phenomena stopped, as if whatever had claimed the house chose not to follow. Or perhaps it was finished. In modern Catholic exorcism manuals, Assodius is no longer treated as folklore. He is categorized, defined, filed, listed among spirits of impurity, entities whose primary method of attack is the destruction of intimacy and identity. Priests are instructed to watch for specific indicators during possession or infestation cases: sudden obscene speech during prayer, sexualized blasphemy during rites, recurring nightmares involving hybrid or animalistic beings, abrupt marital collapse, divorce, infidelity, domestic abuse, fixations on mirrors, nudity, self-image. These signs are not random. They form a diagnostic constellation. In the private field journals of Father Antonio Forti, one entry stands apart. He describes a case involving a Spanish woman, her identity withheld, who during possession spoke fluent ancient Hebrew, a language she had never studied. She referred to herself as the consort of kings, as the one who breaks their beds, as the one who names them. She spoke of a burning throne. She demanded blood and wine. Forti never publicly identified the entity, but in a private footnote, never intended for publication, he marked a reference. Compare Asmodeus. Book of Tobit, a quiet acknowledgement, a careful warning. In 2004, a New England-based clinical psychologist quietly shared notes with a Catholic diocese concerning a patient given the pseudonym Alyssa. What he recorded blurred the boundary between pathology and possession. Alyssa experienced sexual nightmares involving horned figures. She reported voices that mocked prayer. She exhibited sudden hostility toward religious symbols, despite no prior trauma. Her episodes intensified during periods of attempted abstinence. The psychologist did not label it demonic, but the diocese took the case seriously enough to archive it. And within those archives, Assodius is referenced, not as certainty, but as possibility, across decades, across continents, across belief systems. The pattern holds. Homes invaded, marriages shattered, faith weaponized against itself. Whether named or not, the presence is consistent. A slow, wet thud echoes, as if something heavy has stepped onto a wooden floor. The sound repeats. Closer. Some evils announce themselves with chaos. Others move in quietly and make themselves comfortable. They do not haunt houses. They occupy them. In West Pittston, Pennsylvania, a modest duplex became something else entirely. Not cursed, not possessed in the cinematic sense, but claimed. For more than 15 years, the Smurl family lived inside what can only be described as a slow, methodical invasion. At first, it felt like unease, that sensation of being watched when no one was present, the subtle dread that settled into the lungs and refused to leave. Then the house began to change. Rooms developed cold pockets that followed people. Furniture shifted inches overnight. Whispers leaked from walls later found hollow, yet empty. And then the smell came. Not musty, not chemical. The unmistakable odor of decay. Rotting meat. It appeared suddenly, filling entire rooms, then vanished just as quickly leaving nausea and panic behind. The family scrubbed. They prayed. They begged, as if it had simply been finished. Modern Catholic exorcism manuals describe Assodius not as folklore, but as a classified entity, a spirit of impurity, one that does not simply possess bodies, but corrupts relationships. Priests are warned to watch for a specific constellation of signs: sudden obscene speech during prayer, sexualized blasphemy directed at clergy, recurring nightmares involving hybrid or animal-like beings, rapid collapse of marriages, infidelity, abuse, unexplained hatred, obsessive fixation on mirrors, nudity, bodily distortion. These symptoms rarely appear alone. They cluster. They spread. In the private journals of Vatican-trained exorcist Father Antonio Forti, one account chills even seasoned readers. A woman, Spanish and middle-aged, entered possession abruptly. During episodes, she spoke fluent ancient Hebrew. Not phrases, not fragments, entire sentences. She referred to herself as the Bride of Kings, the Breaker of Beds, the one who names them. She described a throne of fire, surrounded by smoke. She demanded blood and wine. Forti never named the entity publicly, but in a footnote, never meant for circulation, he referenced Asmodeus, the Book of Tobit, a scholar's mark, a warning. In 2004, psychologist Dr. Keith Callahan submitted confidential notes to a Catholic diocese regarding a patient known only as Alyssa. Her symptoms escalated during periods of sexual restraint. She reported dreams of horned figures pressing down on her chest, voices that mocked prayer with laughter, an intense revulsion toward religious imagery. She did not believe in demons, but the diocese archived the case anyway, because patterns matter, and the pattern was unmistakable. Across homes, across churches, across centuries, the same themes repeat: intimacy violated, faith inverted, desire transformed into a weapon. This is not chaos. It is preference. And whatever wears the name Assodius, it knows exactly what it is doing. Total darkness. Then, a single match ignites. Too bright, too fast. It burns down to the fingers. Does belief create monsters? Or does belief merely sharpen our vision? Until we finally notice what has been walking beside us the entire time? Here is the truth most people never want to hear. Assodius does not need faith. He does not require worship. He does not depend on prayer, ritual, or superstition. He survives on behavior. He feeds on repetition, on jealousy passed off as passion, on desire excused as self-expression, on rage wrapped in beautiful language, poetry, psychology, art. He thrives in the moments we justify, the moments we rationalize, the moments we repeat, again and again and again. That is why he endures. Not because people believe in demons, but because people keep doing exactly what sustains them. You can dismiss him as myth, as metaphor, as a psychological projection carved from ancient fears. And you may be right. But here is the part that should unsettle you. The effect attributed to Assodius are real. Homes implode. Marriages rot from the inside out. Faith collapses not with explosions, but with quiet compromise. And sometimes, so is he. He does not crash through walls. He does not announce himself with flame. He waits. He observes. He studies patterns. Your patterns. And when restraint weakens, when boundaries blur, when desire outweighs consequence, he does not force the door. He lets you open it. This has been another descent into the Demonology Archives. not a place of cheap fear, but a record of what humanity keeps encountering, no matter how often it changes its language. These stories are not fast. They're not easy, and they're not meant to leave you comfortable. They're meant to linger, to follow you after the screen goes dark, to sit quietly in the back of your mind. The next time temptation whispers, the next time anger feels justified, the next time desire asks for just one exception. I know these episodes are not for everyone, but for those of you who have waited, who asked for deeper dives, darker archives, and no shortcuts, I hope this was worth it. If this episode gripped you, if it unsettled you, if it made you reconsider what real danger actually looks like, leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and I want to hear from you. Your interpretations, your theories, your disagreements, down in the comments. You can also support the channel through the Dark Documentary series, where these investigations continue, slowly, carefully, and without compromise. Until next time, stay observant, stay grounded, and remember, not everything that harms you arrives as an enemy. Some things wait patiently until you invite them in. I'll see you soon with another descent into the dark.